You are listening to the HYDAC podcast. In each episode, we share our knowledge with you in topics related to hydraulics and automation and control, from the basics to the current trends. Stay tuned. Welcome to this episode of HYDAC podcast. I'm your host, William Shaw, and on this episode, we'll be discussing part 1 of digital transformation, which is what is Industry 4.0. Here in our studio to discuss this topic is Mr. Paul Marley. Paul has been involved in the fluid power industry for over 30 years, both as a hydraulic fitter and a technical trainer, a role that he currently holds as HYDAC's Technical Training Manager. Welcome, Paul, and thank you for coming into the studio today. Firstly, as the topic of the podcast asks, what is Industry 4.0? Where has 4.0 come from? I've heard of the Industrial Revolution, but I didn't know that there were 4 of them.
Okay, to answer the question there on the Fourth Industrial Revolution, it depends entirely who you speak to about whether or not there's been one Industrial Revolution or indeed 3 already. It is interesting, if you Google the Fourth Industrial Revolution, you're going to get a lot of sites, and there's a lot of information out there. Certainly that is true if you Google the Industrial Revolution. There's also an amazing amount of information available to everybody on that. What's interesting though is if you Google Industry 2 or Industry 3, you'll only ever see a discussion on those topics in relation to the Fourth Industrial Revolution, where they go back and discuss what happened in the past. So it is a little bit confusing, and that's why I think it's something that we really should discuss and clarify a little bit. The first industrial revolution was, of course, a change from an agrarian society to one that is based on industry and employment. And it was indeed an absolute revolution. You know, a revolution is something that only goes in one direction and it doesn't go backwards. Otherwise, it's a fad. This was a revolution because it changed the world. So it changed the world with regards to mechanisation, and it changed transport, it changed trade, made trade global rather than just at a village level. So really that was driven and characterised by mechanisation of things. Basically, if we think about the machines that we used back then, we primarily think of steam power. Hydraulics also had a very big part to play in that, because the hydraulic systems were powered by steam. You had burning coal, and that was basically creating steam. The steam was driving the hydraulic pumps, and the hydraulic pumps were able to do the heavy work. So at the start of the Industrial Revolution, we had ships that were built out of wood. By the end of it, we had very heavy ships built out of iron and powered by steam. Very, very different. So hydraulic power gave us the ability to do lifting of heavy loads, stamping, forging and riveting and so on. So it played a very big role, hydraulic power. Of course, I'm going to emphasise that because I have a passion for hydraulics, but others are going to, of course, concentrate on the steam. So that was the first Industrial Revolution. The second Industrial Revolution was seen as an acceleration point from there, and that was the development of electricity and therefore electrical drive with electrical motors, and then, of course, mass production. The third Industrial Revolution was another acceleration point brought on by the development of computers and automation and controls, so primarily from industrial controllers and the computers that drive them. And then the fourth Industrial Revolution was characterised by connectivity and cyber-physical systems.
So whenabouts did all of these industrial revolutions occur? Would you have an approximate dates and timelines for some of these revolutions?
Yes, absolutely. So the first Industrial Revolution started around 1760-ish and took us to about 1830-ish. Now, the reason I'm saying the ish is because there's always vague points. You can never really say when this started or when it finished. But the term the Industrial Revolution was coined by a gentleman by the name of Arnold Toynbee in about 1830. So he looked back and said, okay, this was a revolution and let's discuss that. So that's the term that they looked back with. They never said at the start, around 1760, let's revolutionise things. And that's a key difference with Industry 4. Industry 4 is happening now, and we're looking forward saying this is the fourth revolution, where the first one they went back and went, look, everything changed. That was a revolution. So it was a very different way of categorising it. So the first Industrial Revolution happened around about then, 1760 to 1830. The second Industrial Revolution, basically electricity. So in 1800, Alessandro Volta had worked out how to make a battery, and then we have electrical power. In about 1820, a Dane by the name of Hans Christian Ørsted worked out that when he turned on an electrical wire, it affected his compass. So he realised that magnetism affects electricity and electricity affects magnetism. And very soon after that, some other gentlemen got in there and said, okay, we can make electricity affect a mechanical thing. So then we very quickly developed electrical motors from that point. So we've very, very quickly got into the second Industrial Revolution. The third Industrial Revolution started around the late 60s. We had the development then of the computers, and it was centred around the computers and what you can do with that. The fourth Industrial Revolution, that's an interesting thing. When did that start? Well, that started as a term. It was coined in 2011 at the Hanover Mess. So it was basically, the term was coined by the World Economic Forum and presented at a German trade expo.
So Industry 4 was presented in 2011, so why do we still consider it a new idea in today's?
So that's an interesting point. If you look at historical events, the way things work, there's always a bit of a lag with regards to technology. There's always an adoption phase. It was interesting that the first Industrial Revolution, as I said, started about 1760. Well, Newcomen invented his atmospheric engine in 1712, but then nothing really happened until 1760. So there's been a lag of 50 years where not a lot really happened, certainly with regards to the steam development. So what happened in about 1763 was Boulton and Watt then patented the steam engine. Basically, that got to a point then where there was some technical maturity that enabled the steam to be able to be used much more efficiently. So we've seen a similar thing with Industry 4. There's a parallel there because really in 1968 we had the computers. So we've had the computers already for 50 years. But realistically, they are being used in industry because that is Industry 3. What categorises Industry 4 and makes it distinct from Industry 3 is that we've reached a point now of technical maturity where we can do a lot of the things that were not possible until now. So there's some parallels there, and that's a key word then, technical maturity.
I've also heard of the term of Industrial Internet of Things being thrown around a fair bit. Is that also related to Industry 4.0, and how does that relate to the industry that we're currently in? So, like all answers there, it's a little bit vague. Is the Industrial Internet of Things and Industry 4 the same thing? Well, it literally depends on where you are in the planet, whether or not that's the same thing. Basically, the World Economic Forum, as I said, released Industry 4 as an idea in Germany, and it's a very German and European feel. In the United States, they never really used that term. It was not presented to them, and in fact, you could argue that they were almost excluded. It wasn't a world thing. It is more European, so Industry 4.0 is not really a term that's going to be used in the United States. But it is, in my understanding, a very distinct thing because the Industry 4 technologies, the enablers of that and the technologies that drive it, the Industrial Internet of Things is only part of that. It's not all of it. So Industry 4.0 is a much more broad subject, and that's something we can expand on a little later. So just coming back to the World Economic Forum where this was initially raised, was that proposed Industry 4.0, was that originally raised by an individual, a company, or the industry body? How did this all come about? Well, the idea was, as I said, it was the World Economic Forum. Lo and behold, that's chaired by a German engineer, Klaus Schwab. So he's written a book on it, and it's called The Fourth Industrial Revolution. This gentleman is, as I said, a German engineer and economist. So he's the founder of and the executive chairman of the World Economic Forum.
So a lot of the ideas that he's come up with have become ideas that are more broad through the World Economic Forum. So I've got a few quotes from his book that really put into context how big a subject he feels this is. So this is a quote from Klaus Schwab. Of the many diverse and fascinating challenges we face today, the most intense and important is how to understand the shape of the new technology revolution, which entails nothing less than a transformation of humankind. We are at the beginning of a revolution that is fundamentally changing the way we live, work, and relate to one another. In its scale, scope, and complexity, what I consider to be the fourth industrial revolution is unlike anything humankind has experienced before. The question for all industries and companies, without exception, is no longer, am I going to be disrupted? But, when is disruption coming? What form will it take? And how will it affect me and my organisation? So, big words, and you can see how some people are made nervous by an opinion like that one.
So just coming back to the topic of the podcast, the digital transformation, how does this all tie into digital enterprise as well? And are they the same thing?
Certainly digital transformation is part of it. And it's really, if you distill all of this into a little container, well, what does that mean? What is that container? What is that little nugget of knowledge that everyone's after? If you distilled it, I read that Industry 4 is all about connectivity. And it's all about efficiency and optimizing a business and optimizing a process. And it's all about transforming digitally, using digital technologies to transform the business. So it's about connecting, optimizing, and transforming and becoming digital, becoming modern in every sense.
So business that's undertaken all of these things, so they've undertaken digital connections, they've optimized and they've transformed into a digital enterprise. What do they look like?
Well, then it's a business that's going to be selecting new technologies, and they're going to choose technologies that are going to create a differentiation in the marketplace, and it's all about gaining a competitive advantage. Better products, better systems, and more efficient production, more efficient distribution, and more efficient use.
Would you be able to provide some examples of this type of digital enterprise and what they would look like in the future?
Yes, absolutely. So it is very broad, and if you're looking at the context of all of this, it's broad. Where do you start? Where do you end? I've selected 4 key things that are quite different, and it shows you really the scope of this. So the first one is transforming your digital profile. So the way you look to the world, basically, if you're not on the internet and if you're not strongly represented there, you're not really existing to a lot of the population. And that means that you're excluded from your customers and from a broader market. So your digital profile is very, very important. We want to optimize our websites. We want to have apps, because I've heard a lot of young people say, well, if it's not an app, I'm not interested. Literally, I've heard that. We want to be using social media so that we're in the face of people, whether they want us to be or not. And we are also going to use the web to do whatever we can to gain efficiencies. And that may mean online ordering and parts tracking and so on. Another thing that we can do is use the digital connectivity to control and understand our distribution and supply chains better. So with a view to having closer connectivity with our suppliers and our distributors. It's about being able to see vertical and horizontal supply chains a little more clearly. With regards to manufacturing, Industry 4 has some technologies that can increase efficiency and response times. So ultimately this will lead to a better product, fewer defects, and a much more efficient production. And the fourth thing that we could do is value adding to everything that we do. So we could use data and data analytics to improve every aspect of the business. And if you think that this can't be used in every aspect of the business, absolutely it can. So digital profile, digital logistics, digital manufacturing, and digital value adding.
Thank you, Paul. That's all we have time for today in today's episode. Stay tuned for our future podcasts, and we hope to see you all back here soon. Thanks for joining us on this episode of HYDAC Podcast. For an in-depth learning on the subject you've just listened to, enrol on the technical training at HYDAC Australia. For more information, visit our website hydac.com.au. HYDAC, global presence, local competence.